Torres looked between them, clearly sensing the undercurrents. "I don't want to impose. If there's a phone number for a taxi service—" "Nearest taxi is in Grand Junction," Michael said. "And they won't come out in this weather." "Then I'm very grateful for your hospitality," she replied, with a dignity that somehow made the situation less awkward. The unexpected guest transformed dinner from its usual silent affair into something almost normal. Rebecca, as she asked them to call her, helped Emma finish preparing the pasta, showing her a trick for keeping it from sticking together. She asked Tyler about his drawings, displaying genuine interest that coaxed the boy into actual conversation. For the first time in weeks, and somehow, mysteriously, she got Lily to eat vegetables without a battle, a feat Michael had long since abandoned attempting. "You're very good with children," Michael observed as they cleared the dishes afterward. The kids had gone to prepare the spare room, arguing about which sheets to use with an enthusiasm that seemed foreign in their usually subdued home. Rebecca rinsed a plate before answering. "I specialized in pediatrics before joining the rural medicine program. Children are often the most honest patients." She handed him the plate. "Your kids are remarkable. They've been through a lot, haven't they?" Michael took the dish, surprised by the directness of her question. People in Pine Ridge talked about his family constantly, but never to his face. "Their mother died last year. Car accident on Sawmill Pass." "I'm sorry." The words were simple, without the cloying sympathy or morbid curiosity he'd come to expect. 18 months ago, he corrected himself, drying the plate with mechanical precision. "Feels like yesterday sometimes. Other times, it feels like a lifetime." Rebecca nodded, continuing to wash dishes in companionable silence. It struck Michael that this was the first conversation he'd had with an adult in months that didn't involve apologizing, defending himself, or navigating barely concealed hostility. "The town doesn't seem to think much of you," she said suddenly, handing him another plate. He nearly dropped it. "You've been in town all of 10 minutes and already heard about Michael Bennett, the disgrace of Pine Ridge? I had a phone interview with Nurse Patton at the clinic last week. She was quite thorough in explaining the local dynamics." Rebecca's voice held a touch of dry humor. "She seemed to think I should know who to avoid. And yet you're standing in my kitchen. I've never been good at following other people's rules about who deserves help." She rinsed the last fork and turned off the water. "Besides, I make my own judgments." Before Michael could respond, the children returned, announcing the room was ready. The conversation shifted, the moment of connection slipping away as quickly as it had formed. Yet something had changed in the atmosphere of the house, as though a window had been cracked open, allowing fresh air into a space that had been sealed for too long. That night, after the children were in bed and their unexpected guests settled in the spare room, Michael sat alone in the kitchen. The snow continued falling outside, coating Pine Ridge in a blanket that would make the roads treacherous by morning. He should feel unsettled by the stranger under his roof, this woman who spoke too directly and saw too clearly. Instead, he felt something he couldn't immediately identify. It took him several minutes to recognize it as relief, the easing of a burden carried too long in isolation. The sound of footsteps on the stairs broke his reverie. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, having exchanged her travel clothes for what must be sleep attire. Flannel pants and a university sweatshirt, her hair loose around her shoulders, making her appear younger. "I hope I didn't wake you," she said. "I was looking for water." Michael gestured to the cabinet. "Glasses are there. I should have thought to bring one up." "You've had other things on your mind." She filled a glass from the tap and leaned against the counter, studying him with the clinical assessment he imagined she used with patients. "How long have you been having trouble sleeping?" He almost lied. The automatic deflection that had become his standard response to personal questions. But something about the lateness of the hour and the unexpected connection of their earlier conversation made honesty easier. Since the accident. The mine accident, he clarified. About 10 months ago. After Sarah died, I couldn't sleep. After the mine, I stopped trying. Rebecca nodded, sipping her water. The town blames you for the injuries. 6 men hurt. Packard lost his right hand. Dominguez won't walk right again. Jenkins has lung damage from the dust. He recited the litany he carried daily. I signed off on support beams that shouldn't have passed inspection. The company pressured everyone to keep production up. I knew better. Were you cited, legally charged? Investigation cleared me. Said the company falsified some of the testing documents. His laugh held no humor. Doesn't matter. Everyone knows I was the last signature on the form. Rebecca set her glass down. So you've sentenced yourself to purgatory instead. The bluntness of her assessment startled him. It's not that simple. It rarely is, she agreed, but from what I see, you're punishing yourself and your children for a mistake that wasn't entirely yours. Michael felt a flare of anger, the first real emotion beyond grief or shame he'd experienced in months. The nearest emergency room is over an hour away in good weather. With these roads, could be 2, maybe 3 hours today. The Packard house was a small ranch-style home, with a ramp recently added to the front steps, a modification necessitated by the periods when Roy's phantom pain became too much for him to manage stairs. Martha Packard opened the door before they had fully exited the truck, her face tight with worry and shock at seeing who had delivered the doctor. "He's this way," she said to Rebecca, barely acknowledging Michael. "Fever hit 103 last night." Michael stood awkwardly in the Packard's living room as Rebecca was ushered down the hall to Jason's bedroom. The walls held family photos, including several of Roy before the accident, standing proud in his mining gear, arm around Martha, playing baseball with his son. A more recent photo showed him receiving a community service award, the sleeve of his right arm pinned neatly where his hand should have been. "Why are you still here?" Michael turned to find Roy Packard watching him from the doorway to the kitchen. The man looked older than his 38 years, face lined with pain that was both physical and something deeper. "I drove Dr. Torres." "Over, roads are bad." Packard nodded once, a jerky movement. "Didn't expect you to be the one bringing her." "Didn't expect you to call me," Michael countered. A moment of tense silence stretched between them, 2 men who had once worked side by side, now separated by blame and guilt, and an accident that had altered both their lives. "Martha wanted to call someone else," Roy finally said, "but I knew Sarah's remedies were the best in town when Jason's fever wouldn't break." He left the sentence unfinished. Michael nodded, understanding what it cost the man to admit he had needed something only Michael could provide. Sarah would have wanted to help. "Yeah," Roy's voice roughened. "She was a good woman." The simple acknowledgement of Sarah, not as Michael's dead wife, but as herself, a person of value the town had known and respected, hit Michael with unexpected force. Before he could respond, Rebecca emerged from the hallway, her expression calm but serious. "It's strep throat," she announced. "He needs antibiotics, which I can prescribe once I officially check in at the clinic. But his fever is dangerously high right now. We need to get it down immediately." Martha appeared behind her, twisting her hands in her sweater. "We've tried cool compresses, fever reducers." "I need a few specific items," Rebecca said. "Michael, can you take me to the general store, then back to your house? Sarah's remedy book might have something that could help while we wait for the antibiotics to start working." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Carter's general store fell silent when Michael entered with the new doctor, whispers following. Them as she efficiently collected ingredients, ginger, elderberry, specific types of tea. Michael stood uncomfortably at the register as old man Carter rang them up, pointedly speaking only to Rebecca. Back at his house, The children helped Rebecca locate Sarah's remedy book, a leather-bound journal Emma had preserved in a drawer, unable to use it herself but unwilling to part with it. Michael watched as Rebecca quickly flipped through the pages, nodding at Sarah's neat handwriting and detailed instructions. "Your wife was remarkably knowledgeable," she said, pausing on a page about throat infections. "Some of these are exactly what I would recommend. The elderberry tea with honey and this ginger compress, they're clinically supported treatments." In the margin of the page, Sarah had written, "When fever spikes with throat pain, combo of remedies 3, 7 and 12 worked for Emma, age 8. Be patient, takes about 3 hours to break fever." They returned to the Packard house with supplies and instructions. Rebecca efficiently prepared the treatments, explaining each step to Martha, while Michael stood awkwardly in the background. When they were done, Rebecca promised to return with antibiotics as soon as she could officially check in at the clinic. Outside, as they prepared to leave, Rebecca paused by the truck. "You need to come with me to the clinic," she said. Michael shook his head. "They won't want to see me there." "I'm not asking." Her tone brooked no argument. "The children need checkups. According to Emma, none of you have seen a doctor since before Sarah died. I checked the records when Nurse Patton sent over the patient files. Your family is coming. In today, all of you. The town will have to get used to seeing the Bennetts at my clinic," she interrupted. "I'll be treating patients based on medical need, not social standing, starting with your family." Something in her determined expression reminded Michael of Sarah when she'd made up her mind about an important matter. It was a comparison that should have pained him, but instead, it merely underscored the first stirring of what might be hope. "All right," he agreed, "but don't say I didn't warn you." Pine Ridge Clinic sat at the center of town, a single-story brick building that had once been the library before a larger facility was built on the north side. Its transformation into a medical facility had been completed just 5 years ago, a point of pride for the community that had raised funds through bake sales, charity auctions, and mining company donations. Michael couldn't remember the last time he'd been inside. Sarah had always taken the children for their checkups, and, after her death, he'd avoided any place where sympathy might be offered openly or judgment passed in whispers. The fresh snow had been partially cleared from the clinic's walkway, but Rebecca still stepped carefully as she approached the entrance, medical bag in hand. Michael followed behind with the children, aware of the stares from people on the street. Emma walked stiffly beside him, chin raised in the defiant posture she'd adopted whenever they ventured into town together. Tyler kept his eyes on the ground, shoulders hunched inside his too small winter coat. Only Lily seemed oblivious, skipping occasionally to keep up, her mittened hand clasped in Michael's. "Dad, is Dr. Becker going to work here all the time now?" Lily asked, her voice carrying in the crisp morning air. "That's the plan," Rebecca answered before Michael could, looking back with a smile. "For at least the next 2 years." Michael caught the surprise on Emma's face. 2 years was a commitment in a town where medical professionals typically completed their rural service requirement and moved on within months. Pine Ridge wasn't the kind of place ambitious doctors chose to establish careers. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Diane gave him a look that suggested she wasn't fooled by the clarification, but was too polite to say so. "Well, I've got 3 good options to show her. One's over on Elm Street, another by the new library, and a small house just at the edge of town. All available immediately." Michael nodded, trying to ignore the hollow feeling that expanded in his chest. Of course, Rebecca needed her own place. Their arrangement had always been temporary, a fact he'd understood intellectually, but hadn't fully processed emotionally. The prospect of returning to their previous isolation felt unexpectedly bleak. The sound of Rebecca's car pulling into the driveway interrupted his thoughts. She entered a moment later, medical bag in hand, surprise registering on her face at finding Michael and Diane in conversation. "Ms. Mercer, I'm so sorry. Am I late?" She checked her watch with a frown. "You're early, actually," Diane assured her. "I was even earlier. Bad habit from years of showing houses." She gathered her portfolio from the coffee table where she'd set it. "I have those 3 properties, ready to show you whenever you're set to go." Rebecca glanced at Michael, something unreadable flickering across her expression. "Give me 5 minutes to freshen up?" When she disappeared upstairs, Diane turned to Michael with a thoughtful look. "You know, it's interesting. Most doctors who come through the rural service program can't wait to settle into their own place. They like their privacy after a long day at the clinic." She tapped her portfolio against her palm. "Dr. Torres, specifically, requested properties that would be suitable for frequent visitors, mentioned needing space where children would feel comfortable." Michael wasn't sure how to interpret this information or why Diane was sharing it with him. "She's a pediatric specialist," he said finally. "Makes sense she'd think about children." Diane's smile suggested she found his response either obtuse or deliberately evasive. "I suppose it does." She headed toward the door. "I'll wait in my car. Tell Dr. Torres no rush." Left alone, Michael found himself standing in the middle of his living room, suddenly aware of the changes that had accumulated over just a few days. Rebecca's medical journal stacked neatly on the side table, a schedule for the children's medications magnetized to the refrigerator in her precise handwriting, Lily's drawing of Dr. Becker pinned to the bulletin board that had been empty for over a year. Rebecca descended the stairs, having changed from her clinic clothes into jeans and a sweater. She paused on the bottom step, studying Michael's expression. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Fine," he replied automatically, then corrected himself. "Actually, I was just realizing how much you've already become part of our routine." Rebecca set her purse down. "Is that a problem?" "No, it's..." Michael struggled to articulate something he hadn't fully processed himself. "The kids will miss you when you move out." "I see." Rebecca's voice was carefully neutral. "And you?" The question hung between them, direct in a way that was characteristic of her but still startling to Michael, who had grown accustomed to the town's sidelong glances and indirect judgments. "I'll miss the help with the kids," he said, which was true but incomplete. Rebecca nodded, her expression giving away nothing. "Of course. They're wonderful children who've been through a lot." She picked up her purse again. "I should go. Miss Mercer is waiting." "Rebecca," Michael said as she reached for the door handle, "I'll miss having someone who doesn't look at me like I'm either broken or guilty. Someone who just sees us." She turned back, a small smile touching her lips. "I'm still going to see you, Michael, all of you. I'm your doctor, remember?" "Right," he agreed, feeling strangely deflated. "Of course." Rebecca studied him for a moment longer, then added quietly, "And hopefully your friend, if that's allowed." Before he could respond, she was out the door, crossing to Diane Mercer's waiting SUV. Michael watched through the window as they drove away, wondering when exactly Rebecca Torres had shifted from unexpected disruption to essential presence in their fractured lives. Rebecca moved into the small house on Aspen Lane 3 days later. It sat at the edge of town with a view of the mountains, just far enough from the center of Pine Ridge to offer privacy, but close enough for easy access to the clinic. The Bennett children had insisted on helping with the move, though Rebecca's possessions were minimal, just what she'd brought in her car, plus a few essentials ordered online and delivered to Michael's house. "It's so empty," Lily observed as they carried the last box into the living room. The rental came partially furnished with the basics, a couch, bed, dining table, but lacked any personal touches. "I travel light," Rebecca explained, setting down a box labeled kitchen. When you move every couple of years for training and assignments, you learn not to accumulate too much. Emma looked around the sparse space with a critical eye. It needs curtains and pictures on the walls. Please escort Mr. Jenkins to the waiting area and offer him coffee. I'll speak with him about his daughter's case once I've completed my current patient's care. Without waiting for a response, Rebecca guided Emma back toward Michael and the other children, effectively dismissing both Jenkins and Nurse Patton. The authority in her manner left no room for argument, and even Jenkins seemed to recognize he had met an immovable force. "Emma, are you all right?" Michael asked quietly, drawing his daughter against his side. Emma nodded, but he could feel her trembling. It wasn't the first time one of the miners had confronted them, but it was the first time someone had stepped between them and the town's anger. Rebecca crouched to address all three children. "I want to be very clear about something," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "This clinic exists to provide care for everyone in this community. Everyone. You are welcome here anytime you need medical attention, and no one has the right to make you feel otherwise." She looked up at Michael. "That goes for all of you." Something tightened in Michael's chest. Not the familiar constriction of anxiety, but a different sensation altogether. It took him a moment to recognize it as gratitude mixed with a fierce protectiveness he hadn't felt capable of in months. "Thank you," he said simply. Rebecca nodded once, then straightened. "I need to get those prescriptions for Jason Packard, and now that I think of it, I should probably deliver them myself to check on his progress." She glanced at Michael. "Would you mind driving me? I'm still waiting on news about my car." It was a transparent excuse to remove the Bennett family from the tense atmosphere of the clinic, but Michael accepted it gratefully. As they walked back to his truck, Emma close by his side and the younger children trailing behind, he noticed several townspeople watching from the storefronts across the street. Word of the confrontation at the clinic would spread within hours. The new doctor had publicly sided with the Bennetts against one of the injured miners. He couldn't imagine how this would make Rebecca's position in town any easier. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly as they reached the truck. "You're just making trouble for yourself." Rebecca helped Lily climb into the back seat before responding. "Standing up for what's right isn't trouble. It's the bare minimum expectation of my profession." She met his gaze over the roof of the vehicle, and it was necessary, not just medically, but humanly. The drive to the pharmacy and then back to the Packard house passed in thoughtful silence. Michael found himself watching Rebecca as she prepared Jason's medication, explaining the dosage to Martha with patient clarity. There was something in her manner that reminded him of Sarah, not in appearance or even temperament, but in the fundamental certainty of her convictions. Sarah had never wavered once she determined a course was right, regardless of difficulty or opposition. It appeared Rebecca Torres operated from the same unwavering center. Jason's fever had begun to recede, and Roy Packard managed a gruff thanks as they left. If he had heard about the confrontation at the clinic, he gave no indication. The interaction was stilted, but lacked the open hostility Michael had come to expect. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was, perhaps, a fractional reduction in blame. As they drove back toward Michael's house, Rebecca's phone rang. Service had been restored now that the storm had cleared. It was the mechanic, informing her that her car would be ready by late afternoon. Michael felt an unexpected pang at the news. The doctor's presence had disrupted the stagnant routine of their household, introducing an energy that had been absent for too long. "Will you be staying at the inn now?" he asked as she ended the call. Rebecca gazed out at the snow-covered landscape. "Actually, there's still no vacancy because of the mining conference. The mechanic suggested I ask Nurse Patton for recommendations." Her mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. Somehow, I doubt she'll be enthusiastic about helping me find accommodation at this point. Michael hesitated only briefly. Our spare room is available, at least until you find something permanent. Rebecca turned to study him, her expression thoughtful. That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose further. It's not. Michael stopped, reorganizing his thoughts. The children would like it if you stayed. It was easier than admitting he might want it too. A small smile touched her lips. Just the children. Michael focused on the road ahead, surprised to find himself almost smiling in return. They've been better since you arrived, more themselves. It would be good for them to have that a little longer. He paused. And I could use the help getting their medical issues sorted out properly. Rebecca seemed to recognize the admission for the significant step it was. In that case, I accept, temporarily, until I find my own place. The relief Michael felt was disproportionate to the situation, but he didn't examine it too closely. It was enough that for the first time in 18 months, he had made a decision based on what might help his family move forward rather than simply survive. When they arrived home, Rebecca excused herself to make calls to the clinic and arrange her schedule for the coming days. Michael found himself alone with the children in the kitchen, all three watching him with varying degrees of uncertainty. Is Dr. Becker really going to stay with us? Lily asked, bouncing slightly on her toes. For a little while, Michael confirmed, until she finds her own place in town. Emma's expression was more measured. What about people like Mr. Jenkins? Won't they be mad that she's staying here? The question cut to the heart of their existence in Pine Ridge since the accident. Every choice, every movement in public had been filtered through the lens of town judgment. Michael had accepted it as his due, but his children had borne the weight of it without deserving any portion. Dr. Torres makes her own decisions, he said finally, and it's time we stop making ours based on what the town thinks. He looked at each of his children in turn. We've been living like we've done something wrong, all of us. That stops now. Tyler's eyes widened slightly. But the accident was a terrible thing, Michael acknowledged, and I will always regret my part in it. But you three have done nothing to be ashamed of. Nothing. He crouched, down to be at eye level with his son. I've let you carry my burden, and that wasn't fair. Emma's face showed cautious hope, battling with long-established wariness. So what do we do now? It was a profound question, without an easy answer. What did they do now? After 18 months of existing in a half-life of grief and guilt, how did a family begin to reclaim itself? We start small, Michael said, making the decision as he spoke. We clean up this house. We follow Dr. Torres's medical advice. We go into town when we need to without apologizing for existing. He took a deep breath, and we remember that your mother would want us to live, not just survive. Lily slipped her small hand into his. Can we fix Mum's garden too? The one in the backyard? The garden had been Sarah's pride, vegetables and flowers arranged in a pattern only she fully understood, a living testament to her belief that beauty and practicality could coexist. It had gone to seed within months of her death, Michael unable to maintain it and unwilling to destroy it. Yes, he said, surprised by how right the idea felt. We can start with the garden. The sound of Rebecca's footsteps on the stairs prevented further discussion, but something had shifted between them. A decision had been made, small but significant, to begin moving forward, however tentatively. The next few days established a new pattern in the Bennett household. Rebecca left early each morning for the clinic, returning in the late afternoon with medical supplies, prescribed medications for the children, and often a story about her day that made even Tyler laugh. Michael began the slow process of repairing. The house, fixing leaky faucets, replacing burnt-out light bulbs, addressing the small maintenance issues he had ignored for too long. The children, taking cues from these changes, initiated their own projects. Emma organized their neglected schoolwork, setting up a study corner in the living room. Tyler began drawing again, but his pictures now occasionally included colors, rather than only the somber grays and blacks of recent months. Lily appointed herself Rebecca's assistant, following the doctor around the house asking endless questions about medicine that Rebecca answered with remarkable patience. Word spread through Pine Ridge about the new doctor's living arrangements. Michael noticed the stares when he drove Rebecca to and from the clinic, but the expected confrontations didn't materialize. Whether due to respect for Rebecca's position or simple uncertainty about how to address the situation, the town seemed to be taking a wait-and-see approach. On the fourth day of Rebecca's stay, Michael returned from dropping the children at school to find a blue SUV parked in his driveway. A woman he didn't recognize stood at his front door, hand raised to knock. She turned at the sound of his truck. "Mr. Bennett," she called as he approached. "I'm Diane Mercer, Pine Ridge Realty. Dr. Torres asked me to show her some rental properties today." She glanced at her watch. "She said she'd meet me here at 9. Michael checked his own watch. It was only 8:30. She should be back from the clinic soon. She had an early appointment. He unlocked the door and hesitated, social graces rusty from disuse. "You can wait inside if you'd like." Diane Mercer followed him into the house, her eyes cataloging the visible improvements with professional assessment. "You've done nice work here," she commented. "Place has good bones." Michael wasn't sure how to respond to what seemed like genuine approval rather than the veiled criticism he'd grown accustomed to. "Thanks, it's a work in progress." "Aren't they all?" Diane smiled easily. "I remember when you and Sarah first bought this place. She had such plans for it." The casual mention of Sarah without the usual awkward sympathy caught Michael off. "In guard, you knew Sarah?" "Book club every other Thursday. She would bring the most amazing lemon bars." Diane's expression softened. She was proud of this house. Said it had a good heart, whatever that means in real estate terms. Michael could almost hear Sarah saying those exact words. She had fallen in love with the house, despite its dated kitchen and problematic plumbing, insisting it felt right in a way more turnkey properties hadn't. "She was right," he said quietly. "It does have a good heart." Diane nodded, as though this made perfect sense in her professional assessment. "The best ones do." She glanced around the living room. "Dr. Torres seems nice. Town's been needing a permanent physician for years." "She's been good for the kids," Michael said, then realized how personal the comment sounded and quickly added, "medically speaking, the rest takes time." Their eyes met, an understanding passing between them that required no words. Michael found himself noticing details he had overlooked before, the slight silver threading at her temples, the faint lines at the corners, of her eyes that deepened when she smiled, the steadiness of her gaze that somehow managed to be both clinical and deeply personal. "We'll see you tomorrow," he asked, suddenly aware of how much they had come to depend on her daily presence. "I have afternoon clinic hours, but I'm free in the evening. I still need to finish setting up my examination room at home for emergencies." "I could help," Michael offered. "I'm pretty handy with basic construction." Her smile widened slightly. "I'd appreciate that. Around 6? As they drove home, Michael found himself planning the project in his mind. Shelving that would need to be installed, proper lighting, perhaps a small sink if the plumbing could accommodate it. It felt good to think in these terms again, to consider how his skills might be useful rather than focusing on past failures. At home, as the children prepared for bed, Michael found himself drawn to the hall closet where he had stored the last tangible pieces of Sarah, photo albums, her favorite books, the small wooden box where she had kept family recipes and personal mementos For months after her death, he had slept with her pillow, clinging to the fading scent of her shampoo. When that final sensory connection disappeared, he had packed away everything that triggered the sharpest grief, unable to bear the daily reminders of absence. Now, he carefully lifted the wooden box from the shelf and carried it to the kitchen table. The children were upstairs, Emma reading to Lily as part of their nightly routine, Tyler already in bed with his sketchbook. Michael opened the box slowly, bracing for the wave of pain that had accompanied any direct connection to Sarah's memory. It came, but differently this time. Less like drowning, more like the ache of a healing wound. Inside lay the evidence of a life well lived. Handwritten recipes on index cards, ticket stubs from concerts they had attended during their first years together, a pressed flower from their wedding, small stones the children had given her from various adventures. He lifted out a small leather journal he had never had the courage to read, recognizing Sarah's handwriting on the cover. Notes for future gardens. The first pages contained practical information, planting schedules, soil amendments, sketches of garden layouts. But as he continued turning pages, he discovered something unexpected. Sarah had written letters to each of them, tucked between the gardening notes. Notes for Emma about growing into womanhood, insights she wanted to share with her daughter. Thoughts for Tyler about his quiet sensitivity and artistic spirit. Dreams for Lily's future, written when their youngest was still a toddler. And finally, several pages addressed to Michael himself, written during her last spring, when the garden was in full bloom. "Michael, my love," the entry began, "I'm sitting in the garden watching you teach Tyler how to use the hand tiller. You're so patient with him, even when he gets frustrated. That's one of the 1,000 reasons I love you, your steadiness. You've always been my rock, even when you don't realize it. You see your caution as a fault sometimes, but I see it as care. You think through consequences because you want to protect everyone around you. It's what makes you such a wonderful father and husband. If you're reading this, something has happened to me. I'm not being morbid, just practical. We never know how much time we have, and I want to make sure you know some things in case I don't get to tell you directly. First and most importantly, none of us are guaranteed outcomes. We do our best with the information we have, and sometimes things still go wrong. That's life, not failure. Second, you are enough, exactly as you are. The children don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be present. When you make mistakes, and you will, we all do, show them how to acknowledge them, learn from them, and move forward. That's the greatest gift you can give them. Third, don't stop living if I'm gone. The garden needs tending, the children need laughter, and you, my steadfast love, need connection. Don't use loyalty to me as an excuse for isolation. I want flower crowns at my funeral and dancing at my wake and every bit of joy you can squeeze out of this beautiful, messy life. Plant something new in the garden each spring. Tell the children stories about us, and when you're ready, open your heart again. There's room in this world for more than one great love. All my love, always. Sarah Michael sat motionless at the kitchen table, tears falling unchecked. It was so completely Sarah, practical even in contemplating her own absence, thinking of the garden and the children and him, planning for contingencies. As she had in all things, he had spent 18 months believing he honored her memory through his grief, never considering she might have left instructions to the contrary. "Dad?" Michael looked up to find Emma standing in the doorway, concern etched on her young face. "Are you okay?" He wiped his eyes, not bothering to hide the evidence of emotion. "I found something your mom wrote. For us." He held out the journal. "Come here." Emma approached cautiously, sitting beside him at the table. "Is it about her?" "It's from her, about gardens and life and..." He smiled through the tears. "About dancing at her wake, which we definitely failed to do." Emma's eyes widened at this unexpected description. Mom wanted dancing. apparently, and flower crowns at her funeral instead of all those formal arrangements. He shook his head, a small laugh escaping. She would have hated all that somber ceremony. Emma tentatively reached for the journal, her fingers tracing the handwriting. "Can I read it?" "There are sections for each of us. We should share them together, all three of you." Michael wrapped an arm around his daughter's shoulders. "I think I've been doing this all wrong, Em." Michael nodded. "The part I've marked. Please." He turned back to the wall measurements, giving her privacy as she read Sarah's words. The silence stretched, filled only with the sound of turning pages and steady breathing. When Rebecca finally spoke, her voice was soft with emotion. "She was very wise," she said, "and she knew you extremely well." Michael nodded, not trusting himself to speak immediately. When he did, the words came from a place of raw honesty he had accessed too rarely since Sarah's death. "I thought I was honoring her by holding on to the grief," he said, "by accepting the blame for the accident, by withdrawing from everything. But that's not what she would have wanted at all." He turned to face Rebecca. She would have been the first one fighting for those injured miners and fighting against the company that put profit before safety. She would have kept us connected to the community somehow, found a way to rebuild bridges. "She sounds remarkable," Rebecca said. "The kind of person who understood that healing isn't about forgetting pain, but about growing around it." "Exactly." Michael took the journal back, his fingers brushing against Rebecca's in the exchange. "She told me to plant something new each spring. I haven't touched her garden since she died. It's just weeds now." Rebecca's expression was thoughtful. "It's early April. Not too late to start this year." The simple observation carried a weight beyond its literal meaning. Not too late. The words applied to more than gardening, and they both knew it. "Would you help?" Michael asked. "The children and I, we want to restore the garden, but none of us have Sarah's knowledge." "I'm not much of a gardener," Rebecca admitted with a small smile, "but I'm very good at research and following instructions. If Sarah left notes between all of us, I bet we could make it work." The offer encompassed far more than horticultural assistance. It was an extension of connection, a willingness to be part of their healing process without attempting to replace what had been lost. Michael felt something expand in his chest, not the hollow sensation that had plagued him at the thought of Rebecca moving out, but a fullness, a sense of possibility he had nearly forgotten. "Thank you," he said simply. Rebecca nodded, understanding, passing between them without need for elaborate explanation. "Now, about these shelves, I think we should start with the corner unit, don't you?" They returned to the work at hand, but something had shifted in the atmosphere. A decision had been made, though neither had explicitly stated it, to move forward, to allow new growth, to honor what had been lost by continuing to live. Outside, the spring rain continued its gentle percussion, nourishing soil that had lain dormant, but was still capable of nurturing life. The garden awakened slowly, reluctantly, like someone roused from a deep slumber. 2 years of neglect had transformed Sarah's carefully planned beds into a tangle of weeds and volunteer saplings, the once tidy pathways invisible beneath encroaching grass. Standing at the edge of the backyard, Michael surveyed the wilderness, with the children and Rebecca beside him, Sarah's gardening journal open in his hands. "It's worse than I remembered," he admitted, taking in the full extent of the abandonment. The raised vegetable beds had collapsed in places, wood rotting back into the earth. Perennials struggled amid aggressive invaders, their planned boundaries long since breached. "It's still there underneath," Rebecca observed, pointing to where spring bulbs had managed to push through the chaos, defiant splashes of color amid the brown and green tangle. "See, daffodils. And I think those are tulips by the fence." "Lily," darted forward, dropping to her knees beside a vibrant yellow bloom. "Mom's flowers, they're still growing." Her voice held wonder, as though she'd discovered something magical rather than the simple persistence of perennial bulbs. "Of course they are," Emma said, her practical nature asserting itself. "They're plants. They keep trying, even when nobody helps them." Michael glanced at his oldest daughter, struck by the unintentional wisdom in her statement. Plants weren't the only ones that kept trying, that continued to seek light and nourishment even when neglected. His children had done the same, persisting, adapting, finding ways to grow despite the harsh conditions of grief and isolation he had allowed to become their environment. "Well, they won't have to do it alone anymore," he said, kneeling beside Lily to examine the daffodil. "According to Mum's journal, we have a lot of work ahead of us." Tyler, who had been silent during the initial inspection, pointed toward the far corner of the yard. "The raspberry canes are still there. They're all tangled up, but I can see new leaves." Rebecca moved to stand beside him, surveying the thorny thicket. "You have a good eye, Tyler. Those are definitely raspberries. Your mom mentions them in her notes, says they were your favorite." The boy nodded, a small but genuine smile appearing. "She used to let me eat them right off the plant, said they tasted better with sunshine still on them." The memory, offered without the usual shadow of grief, felt like its own kind of new growth. Michael marked the page in Sarah's journal that detailed the raspberry trellis system she had designed, making a mental note to prioritize its restoration. They spent that Saturday morning creating a restoration plan, guided by Sarah's meticulous notes and drawings. Rebecca proved true to her word about research, arriving with printed information about soil rehabilitation and weed management. She approached the garden with the same methodical care she applied to medicine, analyzing problems and proposing evidence-based solutions. "The first step is reclaiming the space," she explained, helping Michael mark the original boundaries of the garden beds with stakes and string. "We need to define what belongs and what doesn't, then work on improving the soil before major replanting." By midday, they had cleared a small section near the house, revealing remnants of an herb garden. The fragrance of crushed thyme and mint rose from the disturbed soil, triggering memories Michael had long suppressed. Sarah, with clippings in her hands, dirt under her fingernails, explaining to the children the difference between culinary and medicinal herbs. The recollection ached but didn't devastate, a sign of healing he wouldn't have believed possible just weeks ago. "Look what I found. I consider you friends, not just patients." The simple statement shouldn't have affected him as strongly as it did. Friends. Such a basic human connection, yet one that had been largely absent from his life since the mine accident. Colleagues had become distant. Neighbors had turned away, and Michael himself had withdrawn from the few relationships that might have survived the town's judgment. "I'm out of practice," he admitted, "at friendship." Rebecca's expression held no pity, only understanding. "It's like gardening. The skills come back when you start using them again." The parallel was apt. Cultivation, patience, the slow work of nurturing something that had been neglected. Before Michael could respond, footsteps on the stairs announced the children's return. "Dad," Emma called, entering the kitchen with her hair still damp from the shower. "Tyler found something else in Mom's journal. About the garden." She held out the leather-bound book, open to a page Michael hadn't yet examined. He took it, noting the date at the top, just 3 weeks before Sarah's accident. The entry detailed plans for adding a small pond to the back corner of the garden, complete with water plants and possibly goldfish. "For my birthday," Tyler said quietly, joining them in the kitchen. "Mom promised we'd build it together this spring. I forgot until I saw the drawing." Michael examined the sketch, recognizing Sarah's tidy handwriting, listing materials and dimensions. A birthday promise made but never fulfilled, one of countless plans interrupted by her sudden absence. "We could still do it," he said, looking up at his son. "It's a good design, might take some work, but between all of us, I think we could make it happen by your birthday." Tyler's eyes widened, hope and wariness battling in his expression. "Really? You think we could?" I know we could," Rebecca interjected, studying the drawing over Michael's shoulder. "The principles are straightforward. Proper excavation, a good liner, appropriate filtration. And the medical benefits of water features are well documented. The sound alone has measurable effects on stress reduction." Her immediate support, couched in both practical assessment and professional knowledge, solidified the moment. Tyler's face brightened with a smile that had been too rare in recent months. "Thanks, Dad," he said, and then, after a slight hesitation, "Thanks, Dr. Rebecca." That night, after Rebecca had gone home and the children were in bed, Michael found himself returning to Sarah's journal, rereading entries he had previously skimmed in his initial emotional response to finding her letters. Beyond the personal messages, she had documented years of gardening experience, successes and failures, experiments and traditions. Her voice came through clearly in the practical notes, the same blend of meticulous planning and joyful experimentation that had characterized her approach to life. On one page she had written, "Garden design is an act of faith and optimism. We plant not just for today's beauty or this season's harvest, but for years to come. Nothing teaches patience like waiting for a tree to mature or watching perennials establish themselves. The garden reminds us that good things take time and that nurturing matters more than controlling." The wisdom felt especially relevant now, as Michael contemplated not just the restoration of the physical garden, but the regrowth of his family's place in the community. Both would require patience, consistent effort, and a willingness to allow for natural development rather than forced results. He couldn't control how Pine Ridge responded to their reemergence from isolation, just as he couldn't make plants grow faster by willing it. But he could create conditions that encouraged healing, could maintain boundaries while remaining open to new connections. Over the following weeks, work on the garden continued whenever weather and schedules permitted. Rebecca joined them most weekends, arriving with research, supplies, or occasionally treats from the bakery to fuel their efforts. The children responded to the project with increasing enthusiasm, each finding their own area of interest. Emma, designing new layouts for the flower beds, Tyler focusing on the planned pond, Lily appointed herself caretaker of Mr. Whiskers the gnome and his subsequently discovered ceramic friends. The transformation extended beyond the physical space of the garden. Michael found himself engaging more at the children's school, attending Tyler's art show and Emma's debate competition. When Whispers still followed him in public spaces, they seemed less potent, less capable of driving him back into isolation. Rebecca's friendship provided a buffer, but more importantly, it offered an alternative narrative to the one that had dominated Pine Ridge's perception of the Bennett family. The most significant change occurred 3 weeks into the garden restoration, when Roy Packard appeared at the edge of the Bennett's yard one Saturday morning. He stood awkwardly at the property line, watching as Michael and Rebecca assembled. A new raised bed for vegetables. "Bennett," he called finally, drawing their attention. Michael straightened, wiping soil from his hands, tension automatically tightening his shoulders. "Packard." The miner shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable but determined. "Heard you're fixing up Sarah's garden." Michael nodded, uncertain where this conversation was headed. "Trying to." Roy gestured toward the lumber they were using. "That pine won't last more than a season or two in contact with soil. You want cedar." He paused, then added gruffly, "Got some leftover from a project at my place. Good quality. Be ashamed to waste it." The offer hung between them, wrapped in practicality rather than sentiment, but an offer nonetheless. Michael glanced at Rebecca, who had discreetly stepped back to give them space while remaining close enough to intervene if needed. Cedar would be better, Michael agreed cautiously. Last longer. Roy nodded once, decision apparently made. I'll bring it by later, might as well do it right. He turned to leave, then paused, looking back at the partially reclaimed garden. Sarah showed Martha how to preserve raspberries one summer. Best jam we ever had. The casual mention of their wives together, sharing knowledge and friendship before everything fractured, created a momentary bridge across the chasm that had separated the two men. Michael found himself responding in kind. We're clearing the raspberry patch next. Tyler remembered where it was, even under all the overgrowth. A smart kid, Roy said, and then, with a nod to Rebecca, departed as abruptly as he had arrived. Rebecca moved to stand beside Michael, both of them watching Roy's retreating figure. That was significant, she observed quietly. Cedar's expensive. Michael agreed, understanding the material gesture for what it was, not forgiveness exactly, but a step toward some form of coexistence. It's not just about the wood, Rebecca said. He mentioned Sarah and Martha together. He's acknowledging your shared history before the accident. Emma called from the edge of the newly cleared space. She held up a weathered garden gnome, its red hat chipped, its ceramic face still bearing a jaunty grin despite years of exposure. It's Mr. Whiskers. Mom used to move him around the garden to make us think he walked at night. Lily rushed over, taking the gnome with reverent hands. I remember him. He used to guard the strawberries. Your mom was quite the storyteller, Rebecca observed, smiling at the children's excitement over the recovered treasure. She believed gardens should have whimsy, Michael explained, watching as Lily carefully cleaned dirt from the gnome's beard. Said they were more than just functional spaces for growing food. They were places for imagination too. Sounds like she understood that growing children need the same environment as growing plants, Rebecca said. Nourishment, structure, but also room for magic. The observation was so perfectly aligned with Sarah's philosophy that Michael felt a momentary disorientation, as though the two women were in conversation across the divide of time. She would have liked you, he said without thinking. Rebecca's expression softened. That's quite a compliment. It's true. Michael turned back to the garden to hide the sudden emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. She valued honesty and competence above almost everything else. They worked until late afternoon, making modest but meaningful progress. The children's enthusiasm fluctuated, Lily bouncing between intense involvement and distraction, Tyler quietly persistent at whatever task he was assigned, Emma organizing their efforts with clipboard and pencil, creating a schedule that would have made Sarah proud. As they cleaned up for the day, Mrs. Weber from next door appeared at the fence line, her curiosity evidently overcoming the distance she had maintained since the mine accident. She was in her 70s, a widow whose husband had been a miner for 40 years before retiring. Quite the project you've got there, she called, her eyes taking in not just the partially reclaimed garden, but the unusual grouping of people working on it. Michael stiffened slightly, anticipating criticism or, at best, strained politeness. To his surprise, Emma stepped forward before he could respond. We're restoring Mom's garden, his daughter announced, a protective pride in her voice. Doctor, Torres is helping us follow Mom's plans. Mrs. Weber's gaze shifted to Rebecca, who was helping Lily gather tools. That's kind of you, Doctor, taking such an interest in your patients. Rebecca straightened, wiping her hands on her jeans. The Bennetts aren't just patients, Mrs. Weber. They're friends. The simple declaration, delivered without defensiveness or explanation, hung in the air between the properties. Mrs. Weber seemed to consider it, her expression unreadable. Well, she said finally, when you get to the point of planting, I might have some divisions you could use. My peonies have grown too crowded, and Sarah always admired them. The offer, small but significant, was the first neighborly gesture the Bennets had received in months. Michael found himself momentarily speechless, the familiar script of polite distancing suddenly obsolete. "That would be wonderful," Rebecca answered smoothly, filling the silence. "We're following Sarah's plans, but I'm sure she would have appreciated your peonies in her design." Mrs. Weber nodded once, her gaze finally meeting Michael's. "Your Sarah had a gift with growing things. Shame to let it all go to waste." With that parting comment, part criticism, part reconciliation, she returned to her own yard. "Did that just happen?" Emma asked quietly, once the older woman was out of earshot. "Mrs. Weber actually spoke to us. Like, nicely." "People can surprise you," Rebecca said, gathering up the last of the gardening tools. "Sometimes they just need permission to change their minds." Michael considered this as they headed inside to clean up. Permission to change their minds. It struck him that Rebecca's presence in Pine Ridge was providing exactly that, a socially acceptable opening for the community to reconsider its treatment of the Bennett family without appearing to concede that their previous behavior had been wrong. That evening, after the children had gone upstairs to shower away the garden dirt, Michael found himself alone with Rebecca in the kitchen. She had stayed for dinner, a simple meal of sandwiches and soup between bouts of yard work, and was now helping load the dishwasher with an easy familiarity that spoke to how quickly she had become integrated into their daily life. "Thank you," he said, handing her a rinsed plate. "For today, for all of it." Rebecca accepted the plate, placing it carefully in the rack. "You don't need to keep thanking me, Michael. I enjoy spending time with your family. Even when it involves manual labor and disapproving neighbors." She smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of her eyes in a way he had come to find endearing. "Especially then. It's real." She closed the dishwasher and leaned against the counter. "Besides, I'm not just being altruistic. Before I came here, I was working 80-hour weeks in a Chicago hospital, treating one emergency after another, never seeing patients through recovery, barely remembering their names before they were discharged." She gestured around the kitchen. "This, a meal with friends, dirt under my fingernails, neighborhood drama. This is what I came to Pine Ridge to find. Community, connection, continuity of care." Michael studied her, seeing beyond the professional competence that had first defined her in his mind. "You're good at it. The connection part, I mean. Not everyone would have handled Mrs. Weber that way." "I've had practice navigating difficult social dynamics. Rural medicine isn't just about treating patients. It's about understanding the communities they live in." She picked up a dish towel, absently drying her hands. "Besides, I meant what I said." Michael nodded, the insight resonating with his own interpretation. "Baby steps. Sometimes those are the most important kind." She smiled, returning to the raised bed they had been constructing. "Now, let's finish this one so we have room for Roy's cedar when he brings it." The cedar arrived that evening, strapped to the back of Roy's truck. He brought his son Jason to help unload it, and soon the boys were working together, awkwardly at first, then with increasing comfort as they discovered shared interests in video games and comic books. The adults maintained a careful distance, their interaction limited to practical matters, but the slight thaw was undeniable. As spring advanced, the garden's revival became a visible symbol of the Bennett family's gradual reintegration into community life. Mrs. Weber not only provided the promised peony divisions, but began offering unsolicited gardening advice over the fence. The children reported small changes at school, fewer whispers, occasional invitations, teachers who made eye contact again when speaking to Michael at pickup. Rebecca's role in this transformation was both central and carefully bounded. She joined their family dinners once or twice a week, helped with homework, and became an essential part of the garden project. Yet she maintained her professional identity as the town's physician, treating miners and their families with the same care she showed the Bennets, gradually earning respect from even those who had initially rejected her because of her association with Michael. The pond project for Tyler's birthday became a focal point of their efforts as May approached. Michael ordered supplies, dug the initial excavation, and researched proper installation with the same attention to detail he had once applied to mine safety. Rebecca consulted on waterproofing and filtration, approaching the project as though it were a minor surgical procedure, complete with checklists and contingency plans. 2 days before Tyler's birthday, they encountered a problem. The pond liner had developed a tear during installation, and the replacement wouldn't arrive in time for the celebration. Michael was explaining this setback to a visibly disappointed Tyler when a truck pulled into their driveway. Frank Jenkins, one of the most vocal critics of Michael since the accident, stepped out holding what was unmistakably a rolled pond liner. "Packard mentioned you had pond troubles," he said without preamble. "My brother-in-law in Grand Junction has a landscaping business. Called in a favor." Michael stared, momentarily speechless at the unexpected assistance from a man who had confronted Emma at the clinic just weeks earlier. Thank you, Frank." Jenkins shrugged, avoiding direct eye contact. "Kids shouldn't miss out on his birthday because of supply issues. Been there myself with my girl." He set the liner down at the edge of the garden. "This should hold. A few goldfish, anyway." The gesture wasn't accompanied by warmth or reconciliation, but like Roy's cedar, it represented a conscious choice to set aside animosity for the sake of a child's happiness. It was a small breach in the wall of blame that had surrounded the Bennets, another hairline crack in a structure that had once seemed impenetrable. As Jenkins drove away, Rebecca joined Michael by the garden gate. "The town is healing," she observed, slowly, "but it's happening. Because of you," Michael said. "You've given them a way to change their minds without losing face." Rebecca shook her head. "I may have created an opening, but you're the one who had the courage to step through it. That garden," she gestured to the increasingly ordered space, where Tyler was already excitedly examining the new pond liner, "is visible proof that you're moving forward, not running away. People respond to that." Michael considered this, recognizing the truth in her assessment. His withdrawal after the accident had made it easier for the town to maintain its judgment. His re-emergence, his willingness to be seen despite their disapproval, created a necessary tension that forced reconsideration. "Either way," he said, "we wouldn't be here without you." Rebecca's smile held a hint of something beyond professional satisfaction or friendly support, a warmth that had been growing between them over weeks of shared work and quiet conversations. "That's the thing about community healing, Michael. Everyone needs everyone else, including me." The admission of mutual need, simply stated but profound in its implications, lingered between them as they returned to the pond project. In that moment, Michael realized that what had begun as an unexpected disruption to their isolated existence had evolved into something essential. Not just Rebecca's medical expertise or practical help, but her presence in their lives, her willingness to see them as whole people capable of both healing and offering healing to others. Tyler's birthday arrived with perfect spring weather. Sunshine warming the freshly mulched garden beds, a gentle breeze stirring the wind chimes Sarah had hung years ago and Michael had recently rehung. The pond was complete, its surface reflecting blue sky and scattered clouds, several goldfish already exploring their new environment. The celebration was small but significant, the first real birthday party since Sarah's death. Rebecca arrived early to help with preparations, bringing a professionally made cake, since, as she readily admitted, baking remained outside her considerable skill set. Her gift to Tyler was a book on pond ecosystems, practically chosen but aligned perfectly with his interests. What no one expected was the additional guests who arrived throughout the afternoon. First came Jason Packard and his mother Martha, bearing a gift and careful smiles. Then two of Tyler's classmates who had long been absent from his life, their parents waiting awkwardly but purposefully by their cars to ensure the visits went smoothly. Even Mrs. Weber appeared briefly, offering a pot of water lilies for the new pond and staying for a piece of cake. Most surprising was the arrival of Chief Harrison from the Pine Ridge Fire Department, who presented Tyler with a junior firefighter hat and an invitation to the station's open house the following weekend. The gesture held particular significance. Before the accident, Michael had occasionally volunteered with the department, his safety expertise valued by the team. His resignation after the mine incident had been accepted without comment. Another severed connection in a community that had once embraced him. "Good to see you folks doing well," the chief said, his handshake firm as he prepared to leave. "Been too long, Bennett." "Yes, it has," Michael agreed, feeling the weight of disconnection lift slightly with each such interaction. As the day wound down and the visitors departed, Michael found himself sitting beside the new pond with Rebecca, watching Tyler and his siblings feeding the fish with the careful instructions he had memorized from his research. "This is what healing looks like," Rebecca said softly, following his gaze. "Not the absence of pain or the forgetting of what happened, but the creation of new memories alongside the old ones." Michael nodded, the insight resonating with his own experience of the past weeks. Sarah would have loved today. The garden coming back, Tyler's pond, people showing up, especially the unexpected ones. "She is part of today," Rebecca replied. "In the garden plans we followed, in the way you've taught the children to remember her with joy rather than just sadness, in the community connections that are beginning to reform." The observation held no jealousy or competition with a woman she had never met, only recognition of an ongoing presence that shaped their current reality. It was this quality that had drawn Michael increasingly toward Rebecca, her ability to acknowledge Sarah's importance without diminishing her own role, to help the Bennett family heal without trying to erase their past. As twilight descended, the children moved indoors, leaving Michael and Rebecca alone by the pond. The growing shadows created an intimacy that had been building between them for weeks, unacknowledged but increasingly undeniable. "Thank you for today," Michael said, turning to face her, "for everything these past months." Rebecca met his gaze steadily. "You don't have to keep thanking me, Michael. I know, but I want to." He hesitated, searching for words to express something he was only beginning to understand himself. "When you arrived that night in the snowstorm, I thought you were just passing through. Another temporary doctor who would treat us as a professional obligation at best. And now?" Her question was quiet but direct, characteristic of her approach to important matters. "Now, I can't imagine Pine Ridge without you. Can't imagine us without you." The admission felt both frightening and necessary, a step into uncertainty. After months of cautious rebuilding, Rebecca was silent for a long moment, her expression thoughtful in the fading light. "I came to Pine Ridge for professional reasons, to establish a rural practice, to use my skills where they were needed. I wasn't looking for personal connections." A small smile touched her lips. "But sometimes the most important healing happens where you least expect it." The space between them seemed to contract, the evening air charged with possibility. Michael was acutely aware of how long it had been since he had allowed himself to feel anything beyond grief and guilt. How unfamiliar hope felt as it took root alongside the new growth in Sarah's garden. "I'm not trying to replace what you lost," Rebecca continued, her voice gentle but certain. That wouldn't be possible or right. But I do believe there's room for new connections, new beginnings, without diminishing what came before. The echo of Sarah's own words from her journal, "There's room in this world for more than one great love," was so striking that Michael nearly mentioned it aloud. Instead, he reached for Rebecca's hand, the simple contact bridging the final distance between them. "So do I," he said simply. As darkness settled over the garden, lights came on inside the house, illuminating the windows with a warm glow. Duskil. Children moved about inside, visible in glimpses. Emma helping Lily with something at the kitchen table, Tyler carefully carrying his new book to the couch. Their lives continued, evolving rather than erasing the past, finding room for both memory and possibility. Between the house and the newly restored garden, Michael and Rebecca sat together by the pond Tyler had wished for, and the community had helped create. Their conversation turned to practical matters, plans for the next section of garden to reclaim, an upcoming school event, a patient Rebecca was concerned about at the clinic. Yet beneath these ordinary topics ran a current of deeper understanding, a recognition that healing was not a destination, but a journey they had somehow begun to share. Above them, stars appeared in the clearing sky, their ancient light reaching across vast distances to touch the small garden in Pine Ridge, Colorado. In the water, fish moved in lazy circles, adapting to their new environment. Along the fence, Mrs. Weber's peonies waited to bloom, their tight buds holding the promise of summer color. And throughout the garden, in every restored bed and cleared pathway, in the carefully placed gnomes and newly hung wind chimes, Sarah's vision persisted, transformed but not erased, changed but not forgotten. The traveling doctor who had arrived in a snowstorm had indeed changed the Bennett family's fortune, not through dramatic intervention, but through steady presence, not by replacing what was lost, but by creating space for what remained to grow alongside new possibilities. In doing so, she had offered the same opportunity to Pine Ridge itself, a chance to heal old wounds, to acknowledge past errors without being defined by them, to rediscover the essential connections that make a community whole. As Michael walked Rebecca to her car later that evening, the path illuminated by solar lights the children had installed along the garden's edge, he felt a sense of rightness that had been absent for too long. The road ahead would have its complications. Community healing rarely progressed in a straight line, and personal grief followed its own unpredictable course. But for the first time since Sarah's death, he could envision a future worth moving toward, rather than a past impossible to escape. Rebecca paused at her car door, her face partially shadowed in the gentle light. "Tyler had a good birthday," she said. "A new beginning of sorts." "For all of us," Michael agreed, the words encompassing far more than the day's celebration. Their goodnight was simple, a brief embrace, a shared smile, the promise of tomorrow's connection. No grand declarations or dramatic gestures, just the quiet acknowledgement of something growing between them, as natural and persistent as the plants reclaiming their place in Sarah's garden. As Rebecca drove away, Michael stood in the driveway, watching until her taillights disappeared around the bend. Then he turned back toward the house where his children waited, toward the life that was gradually re-establishing itself in new patterns while honoring what had come before. The path was illuminated one step at a time, just enough light to see the way forward without denying the shadows that remained. It was, he realized, precisely what Sarah would have wanted for them all along. Summer arrived in Pine Ridge with a generosity that seemed determined to make up for the harshness of the previous winter. Sarah's garden flourished under the combined care of the Bennett family and Rebecca, who had become such a fixture at their home that her weekend visits were now simply expected rather than arranged. The raspberry canes Tyler had identified beneath. The overgrowth now produced more fruit than they could eat, leading to Martha Packard teaching Emma how to make preserves using Sarah's old recipe. The fence between the Bennett property and Mrs. Webber's had become less a boundary and more a meeting place, the elderly neighbor offering gardening wisdom while accepting vegetables and flowers in return. Tyler's Pond had developed its own ecosystem, goldfish darting between water lilies, dragonflies hovering above the surface on iridescent wings. He had become the pond's dedicated caretaker, checking water quality with scientific precision, his previous withdrawal gradually replaced by focused enthusiasm. Emma had started babysitting for several families in town, her responsible nature finally recognized as an asset rather than overlooked due to her father's supposed failings. Even Lily had found her place in the community's reconfiguration, her natural charm breaking through remaining barriers as she joined the summer recreation program at the community center. Michael watched these transformations with a mixture of gratitude and lingering amazement. The town's collective shift had been gradual, marked by small gestures rather than grand declarations. Roy Packard now nodded when they passed at the hardware store. Frank Jenkins had asked Michael's opinion about a safety issue at his brother-in-law's construction company. Mrs. Hartley at the diner had started saving their usual booth when she spotted the Bennett truck in town. None of these interactions included direct apologies or acknowledgements of the previous isolation, but the change was undeniable. Rebecca's position in the community had stabilized as well. Her initial association with the Bennetts had raised eyebrows, but her consistent professionalism and genuine care for all patients, regardless of their connections, had gradually earned respect. The miners who had initially refused her treatment now waited patiently for appointments, their families seeking her out for everything from minor injuries to chronic conditions. Her medical expertise, once viewed with suspicion because of her outsider status, was now cited with pride by town officials. "Did you hear the news?" Rebecca asked one Friday evening as she joined the Bennett family for their now traditional end-of-week dinner. She set a folder on the kitchen counter as the children greeted her with their usual enthusiasm. "What news?" Michael asked, stirring the pasta sauce that had become one of his specialties in recent months. Rebecca smiled, accepting the glass of iced tea Emma offered. The rural health care grant came through. Pine Ridge Clinic is getting funding for a full-time nurse practitioner and upgraded equipment. Her expression brightened further. And a satellite telemedicine program for the outlying ranches. "That's wonderful," Michael said, genuinely pleased for both Rebecca and the community. "You've worked hard for that." "We all did," she corrected, referencing the community committee that had formed to support the application. Michael had joined that committee 3 months earlier, his first official return to civic involvement since the mine accident. His safety expertise had proven valuable in addressing healthcare access issues for the more remote areas around Pine Ridge. Dinner that evening carried a celebratory atmosphere, the children sharing their own weekly achievements. Tyler's science project had earned top marks. Emma had been invited to join the debate team for the coming school year, and Lily had finally learned to tie her shoes without assistance. These ordinary triumphs, once overshadowed by grief and isolation, now received their due recognition. After the meal, while the children cleared the table, Rebecca touched Michael's arm gently. "Walk with me. I'd like to show you something in the garden." They stepped outside into the lingering summer twilight, the air still warm but softened by a gentle breeze. The garden had transformed in the months since they began its restoration. No longer a wilderness of neglect, but a thoughtfully tended space where order and natural growth coexisted. Sarah's original design was visible in the bones of the layout, but new elements had been introduced. Rebecca's herb spiral near the kitchen door, Michael's expanded vegetable beds, the children's whimsical additions of painted stones and wind catchers. Rebecca led him toward the back corner, where a small space had remained untouched during their restoration efforts. There, partially hidden by taller plants, she had installed a simple stone bench beside a newly planted rosebush. "I wanted to create something for Sarah," she explained quietly. "A place that honors her presence in this garden and in your lives." Michael stood silent, taking in the thoughtful gesture. The rosebush was a peace variety, cream-colored with pink-tinged edges, the same type Sarah had carried in their wedding. A bouquet. The bench faced the garden rather than the fence, positioned to view the full expanse of the space Sarah had created and loved. "When did you do this?" he asked finally, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been working on it for a few weeks, mostly when you were at work and the children at school." Rebecca's expression held a hint of uncertainty. "I hope it's not overstepping." Michael shook his head, words momentarily beyond him. The gesture embodied everything he had come to value about Rebecca: her respect for Sarah's continuing importance in their lives, her understanding that healing didn't mean forgetting, her ability to create space for what had been lost alongside what was being found. "It's perfect," he said finally. "Thank you." They sat together on the bench, shoulders touching lightly, watching as fireflies began to appear in the deepening dusk. Through the kitchen window, they could see the children finishing their chores, their movements illuminated in the warm interior light. "I have something to ask you," Rebecca said after a comfortable silence. "Something I've been considering for a while now." Michael turned toward her, noting the unusual hesitation in her typically direct manner. "What is it?" "My commitment to the rural medicine program was originally for 2 years," she began. "That period ends in October." A flicker of alarm moved through Michael at the reminder. Though he had known the official timeline of her placement, the possibility of her departure had receded in his mind as their relationship deepened. "And I've been offered a permanent position with the program as regional director for Western Colorado, based here in Pine Ridge." She met his gaze steadily. "I've already decided to accept it, but I wanted you to know that you and the children were a significant factor in that decision." Relief and something deeper washed through Michael. "We're glad you're staying," he said simply, knowing she would understand the depth behind the understated response. Rebecca nodded, but her expression suggested there was more. "There's something else. The position comes with funding to expand the clinic, including a proper residence for the director on the property." She paused. "I'd be selling my house on Aspen Lane." "I see," Michael said, though he wasn't entirely sure he did. Was she concerned about their reaction to her moving locations within Pine Ridge? "What I'm trying to say," Rebecca continued, her usual composure giving way to a rare uncertainty, "is that I've reached a point where I need to make decisions about my future here. Professional decisions, yes, but personal ones too." She took a deep breath. "I care deeply about you, Michael. About Emma, Tyler, and Lily. About what we've built together these past months, alongside your memories of Sarah." Michael felt his heart rate accelerate, understanding finally where the conversation was heading. "We care about you too," he said, softly. "More than I think any of us expected when you showed up in that snowstorm." Rebecca smiled, relaxing slightly at his response. "I'm not proposing anything specific right now. It's too soon, and there are 4 people's feelings to consider. Not just ours, but I wanted you to know that when I think about my future in Pine Ridge, I can't imagine it without all of you being a significant part of it." The honesty of her statement, delivered with the same straightforward care she applied to everything important, touched Michael deeply. This was not a demand or even an expectation. It was an acknowledgement of what had grown between them and a gentle inquiry about its potential direction. Sarah wrote something in her journal, he said after a moment, about there being room in life for more than one great love. He looked out over the garden they had restored together, the physical manifestation of both honoring the past and nurturing the present. I think she was right. Rebecca's hand found his in the gathering darkness, their fingers intertwining with the ease of practiced connection. So do I. From inside the house came the sound of Lily calling for them, her voice carrying the particular urgency of a 6-year-old who has discovered something that cannot possibly wait. The moment of quiet intimacy dissolved, but the understanding it had crystallized remained. As they rose from the bench to answer Lily's summons, Michael glanced back at the small memorial Rebecca had created. In the twilight, the pale roses seemed to glow, a gentle presence in a garden that had survived abandonment to flourish once more. Like the Bennett family itself, the garden had not forgotten its past, but had found ways to grow beyond it, incorporating new elements while honoring its original design. The path from the bench to the house was lined with solar lights that illuminated just enough ground to walk safely, a metaphor Michael didn't miss for their current journey. They didn't need to see the entire way forward, just the next few steps. The important thing was that they were moving together, with 4 children's worth of hope leading the way. Inside, the Bennett home buzzed with the ordinary miracle of family life reclaimed. Lily had discovered a lunar moth on the screen door and insisted everyone come see before it flew away. Tyler had questions about its life cycle that only Rebecca could properly answer with her scientific knowledge. Emma was already reaching for the nature guide they kept on the bookshelf, ready to note this sighting in the family observation journal they had started in spring. As Rebecca gently explained moth metamorphosis to the gathered children, Michael watched the scene with a fullness in his chest that had once seemed impossible to imagine. The traveling doctor had indeed changed their fortune, not through dramatic intervention, but through steady presence. She had seen value in what Pine Ridge had rejected, possibility in what grief had obscured, and healing where judgment had created wounds. The moth spread its pale green wings against the screen, delicate and strong simultaneously, poised for flight. In the warm light spilling from the Bennett home, surrounded by voices raised in shared discovery, it paused as if gathering courage for its journey into the night. Then, with a motion almost too quick to follow, it launched into darkness, trusting in its newfound wings to carry it forward. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. The first snow of winter always carried judgment in Pine Ridge. It fell not with the gentle forgiveness most poets claimed, but with an unspoken verdict, separating those who were prepared from those who weren't. Michael Bennett stood at his frost-edged window, watching those initial flakes descend through the gathering darkness, each one a silent reminder of another season he would face alone with his children. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. He pressed his palm against the cold glass, calluses catching slightly on its smooth surface. The construction hands that had once built homes for half the county now couldn't seem to repair the broken pieces of his own. Behind him, the house sat in evening shadows, the sound of his children's muffled voices upstairs providing the only warmth in a home that had grown increasingly cold since Sarah's passing. Michael turned from the window and surveyed the living room with eyes that no longer truly saw it. Mail piled unopened on the coffee table. Sarah's reading chair gathered dust in the corner, untouched since the day of the funeral. The walls that had once displayed family photos now showed only faded rectangles where frames had been taken down, their memories too painful to face daily. Upstairs, Emma was helping Lily with homework, a responsibility that had fallen to her not by choice, but by necessity. At 12, she had stepped into a role no child should bear, becoming a second parent overnight when their mother's car slid off the icy mountain pass 18 months ago. Tyler would be in his room with his drawings, sketches that had grown, increasingly darker and more complex as the months without Sarah stretched on. Pine Ridge had once embraced the Bennetts. Michael had been respected as the mine's safety foreman, Sarah beloved as a third-grade teacher at Maplewood Elementary. But that changed with the accident. 6 miners injured when a support beam failed. A support beam Michael had signed off on just days before. No deaths, thank God, but careers ended, families struggling. An investigation cleared him of negligence, citing corporate pressure to approve materials, but the damage was done. The town had made its decision, and the Bennetts became invisible, except when they needed someone to blame. Michael moved to the kitchen and mechanically prepared dinner. Pasta again, one of the few meals he could manage without disaster. The refrigerator held a note from Emma's teacher requesting a parent-teacher conference, third one this semester. Emma's grades were slipping, her attention wandering. The school counselor suggested grief counseling, but the nearest specialist was in Grand Junction, over 2 hours away. Another failure to add to his growing list. The sound of the doorbell cut through the silence like a thunderclap. Visitors were rare enough to be startling. Michael wiped his hands on a dish towel and moved cautiously toward the door, wondering which neighbor had found another reason to complain about his unmowed lawn or unpruned trees. Sarah's garden, now a tangle of weeds and withered stems. When he opened the door, he found not an angry neighbor, but a woman he'd never seen before. She stood on his porch with a medical bag at her feet and an expression that held neither pity nor judgment, a refreshing change from what he'd grown accustomed to. "Mr. Bennett, I'm Dr. Rebecca Torres." Her voice carried the slight hint of an accent, warm and professional. "I'm sorry to intrude, but my car broke down about half a mile up the road. My phone has no service, and yours is the first house I've come across." Michael stared at her, taking in details with the automatic assessment of someone who had once evaluated safety risks for a living. Mid-30s perhaps, practical clothing beneath a heavy coat, dark hair pulled back from a face marked more by competence than conventional beauty. Her eyes met his directly, no downward glance or sideways look that had become the town's standard way of acknowledging him. "Town's about 3 miles that way," he said, pointing down the road. "Carter's general store has a phone. 3 miles in this?" She gestured to the snow, which had begun falling more heavily during their brief exchange. "I was hoping I might use your phone instead." Michael hesitated. It had been so long since he'd invited anyone into his home, his refuge, and his prison. These past 18 months. "Dad? Who is it?" Emma appeared at his elbow, curiosity overcoming her usual wariness of strangers. Dr. Torres smiled at the girl. "I'm a doctor on my way to Pine Ridge. My car decided to quit on me." "We have a phone," Emma offered before Michael could formulate a refusal, "and it's getting really cold out there." Trapped by his daughter's politeness, one of the many lessons Sarah had instilled in their children, Michael stepped back from the door. "You can come in. Phone's in the kitchen." Rebecca Torres picked up her bag and stepped inside, bringing with her a gust of cold air and something else, an energy that seemed immediately out of place in the still, somber house. She wiped her boots carefully on the mat, removed her coat when Emma offered to take it, and followed Michael to the kitchen. If she noticed the disarray of the house, the unwashed breakfast dishes in the sink, or the general air of neglect, she gave no indication. "Thank you," she said, accepting the cordless phone he handed her. "I hate to impose." "You're not from around here," Michael said as she dialed. It wasn't a question. She shook her head, waiting as the call connected. "I'm the new doctor for the rural medicine program. I'm supposed to start at Pine Ridge Clinic tomorrow." She turned her attention to the call, explaining her situation to whoever had answered. Michael moved away to give her privacy, finding Emma still hovering nearby, watching the stranger with undisguised interest. Tyler had appeared at the foot of the stairs, Lily half hidden behind him. They rarely saw new people in their home, especially not after dark, especially not someone who spoke to their father like he was just a normal person, not the town pariah. Dr. Torres finished her call and handed the phone back to Michael. "The tow truck can't make it out until morning," she said, a small frown creasing her forehead. "And apparently the inn in town is full, something about a regional mining conference." "You can stay here," Emma said before Michael could respond. "We have a spare room." Michael looked at his daughter in surprise. Emma had become fiercely protective of their family space, rarely inviting friends over, treating their home as a fortress against the town's judgment. Yet here she was, offering sanctuary to a complete stranger. "Emma," he began, but his daughter cut him off with a look that was so like her mother's it made his chest ache. "Mom would want to help," she said quietly. The simplicity of the statement left him without argument. Sarah would have insisted. She never would have allowed anyone, especially a woman traveling alone, to be stranded in a snowstorm. "The spare room isn't made up," he said finally, which was his way of agreeing. "Doctor." Torres looked between them, clearly sensing the undercurrents. "I don't want to impose. If there's a phone number for a taxi service..." "Nearest taxi is in Grand Junction," Michael said. "And they won't come out in this weather." "Then I'm very grateful for your hospitality," she replied, with a dignity that somehow made the situation less awkward. The unexpected guest transformed dinner from its usual silent affair into something almost normal. Rebecca, as she asked them to call her, helped Emma finish preparing the pasta, showing her a trick for keeping it from sticking together. She asked Tyler about his drawings, displaying genuine interest that coaxed the boy into actual conversation. For the first time in weeks, and somehow, mysteriously, she got Lily to eat vegetables without a battle, a feat Michael had long since abandoned attempting. "You're very good with children," Michael observed as they cleared the dishes afterward. The kids had gone to prepare the spare room, arguing about which sheets to use with an enthusiasm that seemed foreign in their usually subdued home. Rebecca rinsed a plate before answering. "I specialized in pediatrics before joining the rural medicine program. Children are often the most honest patients." She handed him the plate. "Your kids are remarkable. They've been through a lot, haven't they?" Michael took the dish, surprised by the directness of her question. People in Pine Ridge talked about his family constantly, but never to his face. "Their mother died last year. Car accident on Sawmill Pass. I'm sorry." The words were simple, without the cloying sympathy or morbid curiosity he'd come to expect. 18 months ago, he corrected himself, drying the plate with mechanical precision. "Feels like yesterday sometimes. Other times, it feels like a lifetime." Rebecca nodded, continuing to wash dishes in companionable silence. It struck Michael that this was the first conversation he'd had with an adult in months that didn't involve apologizing, defending himself, or navigating barely concealed hostility. "The town doesn't seem to think much of you," she said suddenly, handing him another plate. He nearly dropped it. "You've been in town all of 10 minutes and already heard about Michael Bennett, the disgrace of Pine Ridge? I had a phone interview with Nurse Patton at the clinic last week. She was quite thorough in explaining the local dynamics." Rebecca's voice held a touch of dry humor. "She seemed to think I should know who to avoid. And yet you're standing in my kitchen. I've never been good at following other people's rules about who deserves help." She rinsed the last fork and turned off the water. "Besides, I make my own judgments." Before Michael could respond, the children returned, announcing the room was ready. The conversation shifted, the moment of connection slipping away as quickly as it had formed. Yet something had changed in the atmosphere of the house, as though a window had been cracked open, allowing fresh air into a space that had been sealed for too long. That night, after the children were in bed and their unexpected guests settled in the spare room, Michael sat alone in the kitchen. The snow continued falling outside, coating Pine Ridge in a blanket that would make the roads treacherous by morning. He should feel unsettled by the stranger under his roof, this woman who spoke too directly and saw too clearly. Instead, he felt something he couldn't immediately identify. It took him several minutes to recognize it as relief, the easing of a burden carried too long in isolation. The sound of footsteps on the stairs broke his reverie. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, having exchanged her travel clothes for what must be sleep attire. Flannel pants and a university sweatshirt, her hair loose around her shoulders, making her appear younger. "I hope I didn't wake you," she said. "I was looking for water." Michael gestured to the cabinet. "Glasses are there. I should have thought to bring one up." "You've had other things on your mind." She filled a glass from the tap and leaned against the counter, studying him, with the clinical assessment he imagined she used with patients. "How long have you been having trouble sleeping?" He almost lied. The automatic deflection that had become his standard response to personal questions. But something about the lateness of the hour and the unexpected connection of their earlier conversation made honesty easier. "Since the accident, the mine accident," he clarified. "About 10 months ago. After Sarah died, I couldn't sleep. After the mine, I stopped trying." Rebecca nodded, sipping her water. "The town blames you for the injuries. 6 men hurt. Packard lost his right hand. Dominguez won't walk right again. Jenkins has lung damage from the dust." He recited the litany he carried daily. "I signed off on support beams that shouldn't have passed inspection. The company pressured everyone to keep production up. I knew better." "Were you cited, legally charged?" "Investigation cleared me. Said the company falsified some of the testing documents." His laugh held no humor. "Doesn't matter. Everyone knows I was the last signature on the form." Rebecca set her glass down. "So you've sentenced yourself to purgatory instead." The bluntness of her assessment startled him. "It's not that simple." "It rarely is," she agreed, "but from what I see, you're punishing yourself and your children for a mistake that wasn't entirely yours." Michael felt a flare of anger, the first real emotion beyond grief or shame he'd experienced in months. "You don't know anything about my situation." "True," she acknowledged without defensiveness. "I know medicine, not mining, but I know what guilt looks like when it becomes destructive rather than instructive. I see 3 children trying to navigate loss without a map, and I see a man who's forgotten he's allowed to live, even if others suffered." She picked up her glass again. "Forgive my directness, professional hazard. I should get some sleep if I'm going to make a good impression at the clinic tomorrow." She left him sitting there, her words hanging in the kitchen like frost smoke, visible and yet impossible to grasp. Michael remained at the table long after her footsteps faded upstairs, turning her assessment over in his mind, unable to dismiss it as easily as he had the town's whispers and accusations. Outside, the snow continued falling, erasing tracks and covering floors. By morning, Pine Ridge would wear a clean white coat, all its scars temporarily hidden. Michael wondered for the first time in nearly 2 years what it might feel like to start fresh, unmarked by the past. He dismissed the thought almost immediately. Some stains went too deep for even the purest snow to hide. When morning came, Michael woke to the unfamiliar sound of laughter. He lay still, momentarily disoriented by the bright cheer in Lily's voice floating up from downstairs. The aroma of coffee and something sweet, pancakes, drifted through the house. For a disorienting moment, he thought Sarah had returned, that the past 18 months had been the nightmare instead of his current reality. The illusion shattered as memory reasserted itself. Dr. Torres. the stranded traveler. She must be the source of the unexpected domesticity that had infiltrated his home. Michael dressed quickly and made his way downstairs, unsure what to expect. The kitchen had been transformed, not physically. The same worn countertops and outdated appliances remained, but in energy. Lily stood on a chair at the stove, carefully pouring batter under Rebecca's watchful guidance. Tyler sat at the table setting plates, his usual morning scowl replaced by tentative interest, and Emma, his serious, overburdened Emma, was actually smiling as she juiced oranges. "Dad!" Lily spotted him first. "Dr. Becker is teaching me to make pancakes with faces." Michael caught Rebecca's eye over his daughter's head. She gave a small shrug that somehow managed to be both apologetic and unapologetic at the same time. "You didn't need to do all this," he said. "Consider it payment for emergency accommodation," she replied, helping Lily flip a pancake that did indeed have a crude smiley face constructed from blueberries. Besides, the tow truck called. "They're delayed because of the snow. I hope it's all right if I impose on your hospitality a bit longer." Before Michael could respond, the phone rang. Emma answered it, her expression shifting from morning contentment to familiar wariness as she listened. "It's for you, Dad. Mr. Packard." The kitchen fell silent. Even Lily seemed to sense the sudden tension. Michael took the phone, turning slightly away from the watching eyes. "Packard," he said, bracing himself for whatever new accusation or complaint might be coming his way. "Bennett." The gruff voice belonged to Roy Packard, former demolition specialist, now permanently disabled. Because of the support beam Michael had approved. "My boy's sick. Bad fever, can't keep anything down since yesterday. Martha's worried." Michael frowned in confusion. "Why are you calling me?" "Clinic's still closed till noon. No doctor on call till the new one gets in." Packard's voice held the strain of a proud man forced to ask for help from someone he despised. "Martha said your wife kept a book of home remedies, things for the kids when they got sick." The request was so unexpected, Michael couldn't immediately process it. Sarah had indeed kept such a book, a collection of family treatments passed down from her grandmother, supplemented with her own research. She'd been known in town for having solutions when the clinic was closed or kids needed something to tide them over until a doctor could see them. "Your boy, Jason, right? How old is he now?" Michael found himself asking. 7, Packard replied, the single word carrying the weight of a father's worry. Michael glanced at Rebecca, who was listening openly, no pretense of not eavesdropping. "There's a doctor here, actually. Got stranded by the storm last night. She's the new one for the clinic." A pause, then, "Send her, please." 20 minutes later, Michael was driving Rebecca through the snow-covered streets of Pine Ridge toward the Packard home. The roads were treacherous. Not many vehicles had ventured out yet to break trail through the fresh powder. "You didn't have to do this," Michael said, as they crawled past Carter's General Store, where early morning onlookers did double takes at the sight of Michael Bennett driving the new doctor through town. "Your car will be ready soon. You could have waited at the house." Rebecca checked her medical bag on her lap. "A child is sick. That's not something I wait on." She glanced at him. "Besides, I'm curious about the man who calls you for help after apparently blaming you for his injury. He's desperate. Martha must be beside herself to let him call me." Michael navigated around a drift. "And plants," Tyler added unexpectedly. All eyes turned to him in surprise. He rarely offered opinions unprompted. He shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "Mom always said a house needs something living in it besides people." Michael felt the familiar ache that accompanied any mention of Sarah, but it was tempered now by something else: appreciation for Tyler's memory, gratitude that he felt comfortable enough to share it. "Your mom was right," Rebecca said, giving Tyler a warm smile. "Plants would definitely help. Maybe you could advise me on what kind would do well here." The pride that straightened Tyler's shoulders was worth any momentary pain. I could do that. Mom taught me about houseplants before. He stopped, glancing at Michael, uncertainty clouding his expression. Before she died, Michael finished, for him gently. It's okay to say it, Ty, and it's good to remember what she taught you. The moment held a fragile significance, the first time Michael had encouraged rather than deflected conversation about Sarah. Rebecca caught his eye across the room and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Well then, she said briskly, breaking the emotional tension before it could become overwhelming. It seems I have expert consultation available. Tyler for plants, Emma for decorating, and Lily for... She looked expectantly at the youngest. Bennett, I can help make it not smell like an empty house, Lily offered seriously. It needs to smell like cookies or something. Rebecca laughed, the sound filling the bare space with immediate warmth. Perfect. I'm terrible at baking, so I definitely need your expertise there. Michael watched the exchange with a strange mixture of emotions. The scene felt so natural. His children offering their unique abilities, Rebecca accepting their help with genuine appreciation. It created an illusion of normalcy that was both comforting and unsettling. For 18 months, their family unit had been defined by absence. Sarah's death had left a vacuum they had constructed their existence around, learning to navigate the empty space without acknowledging its dimensions. Rebecca hadn't tried to fill that space. She was too perceptive for such a misstep, but her presence had shifted their awareness of it, making the absence less defining. It was as though they had been living in a darkened room for so long, they'd forgotten there could be degrees of light. Dad, are you listening? Emma's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Sorry, what? I said we should take Dr. Torres, Rebecca, to Hartley's for dinner to celebrate her new house. Can we? Hartley's was Pine Ridge's only proper restaurant, a family-owned establishment that served hearty comfort food and doubled as the town's gathering place. Michael couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten there. After the mine accident, casual dinners out had become an exercise in enduring stares and whispered comments. I don't know if... he began, but Rebecca interrupted. That sounds wonderful. Emma, I haven't had a proper meal out since I arrived in town. She looked at Michael. Unless you had other plans for dinner. He recognized the gentle challenge in her eyes. She was pushing him, as she had been since her arrival, to step beyond the boundaries of isolation he had accepted. No other plans, he conceded. Hartley's it is. The diner was busy when they arrived, the dinner rush in full swing. Conversations dimmed noticeably as they entered, heads turning to observe the unusual group, the town pariah, his children, and the new doctor, together voluntarily. Rebecca either didn't notice the attention or chose to ignore it, striding confidently to an empty booth by the window. I've heard great things about the meatloaf here, she said, examining the laminated menu. Any recommendations? The children eagerly offered their favorites. Lily advocating for the macaroni and cheese, Tyler quietly suggesting the pot roast, Emma insisting the chicken pot pie was unmatched. Michael said nothing, too aware of the glances from nearby tables to focus on food preferences. Marlene Hartley herself approached to take their order, her lined face registering surprise at seeing Michael before shifting to professional courtesy. Dr. Torres, welcome to our establishment, she said. Word is you've been making quite an impression at the clinic. Rebecca smiled. Thank you. Everyone's been very welcoming. The statement ignored several tense encounters she'd already navigated at the clinic, including 2 minors who had requested anyone but her when bringing in their families. Nurse Patton had reported these incidents with thinly veiled satisfaction, clearly expecting Rebecca to adjust her stance regarding the Bennetts. Instead, she had calmly stated that patients were welcome to seek care elsewhere if they were uncomfortable with her professional ethics. Marlene's gaze shifted to Michael, the warmth in her expression cooling notably. "Haven't seen you folks in here for quite a spell." "We were overdue for a night out," Michael replied, striving for a normalcy he didn't feel. "Well, what can I get you all?" She took their orders efficiently, if without her usual personal touch, and departed for the kitchen. "The Hartleys. Son was one of the miners," Michael explained quietly once she was out of earshot. "Luke, broken leg, healed clean, but he was off work for 3 months." Rebecca nodded, accepting the information without judgment. "That explains the reception. Family loyalty runs deep in small towns." "We shouldn't have come," Michael said, low enough that the children, distracted by the novelty of being out, wouldn't hear. "It puts you in an awkward position." "I don't find standing by people who need support awkward," Rebecca replied. "I find it necessary." Michael studied her, still not fully understanding her motives. "Why are you doing this? Taking our side? You must know it's making your job harder." Rebecca considered him thoughtfully. "Did it ever occur to you that I'm not taking sides at all? It was a stepping stone, a line on a resume, a way to pay off medical school debt through service programs." Inside, the clinic's reception area was empty except for an older woman behind the desk. Nurse Patton had been part of Pine Ridge's medical care since before Michael was born, delivering half the town's children before the state regulations changed, requiring doctor participation for births. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight bun, her expression shifting from professional welcome to thinly veiled disapproval as she registered who had accompanied the new doctor. "Dr. Torres," she said, pointedly focusing only on Rebecca. "We weren't expecting you until noon. The storm." "Change of plans," Rebecca interrupted smoothly. "I was fortunate enough to find accommodation with the Bennett family when my car broke down near their home last night. They've been kind enough to help me get oriented this morning. I've already made a house call to the Packard boy. Strep throat with high fever. I'll need to write a prescription immediately." Nurse Patton's mouth opened and closed, like a fish suddenly finding itself on land. "You've been to the Packards?" "Yes, and I'll need to return with antibiotics soon. But first, I'd like to do thorough checkups for the Bennett children and their father. It seems they're overdue for preventative care." Michael watched the silent battle of wills between the two women. Nurse Patton clearly wanted to object, but found herself without logical grounds to do so. Rebecca's pleasant expression never wavered, but her stance made it clear she would not be moved on the matter. "I'll pull their charts," Nurse Patton finally said, her disapproval evident in every syllable. "Exam room 2 is set up." Rebecca thanked her with perfect professionalism and then guided the Bennett family down the hallway. Michael caught the look of surprise on Tyler's face. His middle child was perceptive enough to understand that someone had just stood up for them, something that hadn't happened in Pine Ridge for nearly a year. The morning unfolded in a blur of medical routine. Rebecca examined each child thoroughly, her manner shifting to pure professional, while still maintaining a warmth that put even shy Tyler at ease. She noted Emma's slight vision issues, recommended glasses, and discovered Lily had developed a mild case of asthma, likely triggered by the dust that had accumulated in their poorly maintained home. Tyler, she observed, showed signs of anxiety that manifested physically in tension headaches and occasional stomach problems. Michael sat in a plastic chair in the corner of the exam room, absorbing each revelation like a physical blow. He had failed to notice his own children's developing health issues, too wrapped in his grief and guilt to see what was directly before him. Rebecca delivered each diagnosis without judgment, matter-of-factly explaining treatments and preventative measures, as though these were normal discoveries rather than evidence of parental neglect. When the children's exams were complete, Rebecca asked Nurse Patton to watch them in the waiting room while she examined Michael. "That's not necessary," he objected. They're the ones who needed checking. Everyone needs regular medical care, Rebecca countered, closing the exam room door. When was your last physical? Michael couldn't remember. Before Sarah's death, certainly. Possibly before Lily was born. I'm fine. I'll be the judge of that. Rebecca gestured toward the exam table. Your children need you healthy, mister. Bennett, that's not negotiable. Reluctantly, Michael submitted to the examination. Rebecca's hands were brisk and professional as she checked his vitals, listened to his heart and lungs, and examined the chronic tension in his shoulders and back. She noted his blood pressure was elevated, his weight had dropped significantly, and his reflexes showed signs of stress-related issues. You're malnourished, she said finally, making notes in his chart. Not severely, but heading that way. You're not eating properly, probably not sleeping more than 4 hours a night, and your body is showing classic signs of prolonged stress response. Michael stared at the ceiling. Treating me won't change how the town feels. I'm not trying to change the town, Rebecca replied. I'm trying to keep a father alive and well for his children. She set down the chart and met his gaze directly. Michael, you're punishing yourself in ways that are harming your family. Whatever guilt you carry about the mine accident, your children shouldn't pay the price for it. The truth of her words struck him like physical pain. Before he could respond, a commotion erupted from the waiting room. Raised voices, one of them unmistakably Emma's. Michael bolted from the exam table and pulled open the door. In the waiting area, he found Emma standing toe-to-toe with a burly man Michael recognized as Frank Jenkins, one of the miners injured in the accident. Jenkins had suffered lung damage that left him perpetually short of breath, ending his mining career. His face was flushed with anger as he loomed over Emma. Don't deserve to be here, taking up the doctor's time, when my daughter's been waiting for an appointment for weeks, Jenkins was saying. Emma, for all that she was only 12 and a full foot shorter than Jenkins, stood her ground. We have just as much right to see a doctor as anyone else. Tyler had pulled Lily against him in the corner, both children wide-eyed with fear. Nurse Patton stood frozen behind the reception desk, offering neither help nor intervention. Your father crippled half the mining crew, and now you're jumping the line at the clinic? Jenkins continued, his voice rising with each word. This town has put up with enough from the Bennetts. Michael started forward, but Rebecca was faster. She inserted herself smoothly between Emma and Jenkins, her posture relaxed but unmistakably protective. Mr. Jenkins, I presume? Her voice was cool and professional. I'm Dr. Torres. Is there a medical emergency I should know about? Jenkins faltered, caught off guard by her calm intervention. My daughter has had an appointment scheduled for weeks, and I'll be seeing her right on schedule at 4 o'clock today. Rebecca finished for him. As the only physician currently serving Pine Ridge, I prioritize patients based on medical necessity, not personal preference or community standing. She glanced at the children, then back to Jenkins. I should warn you that I take a particularly dim view of adults who intimidate children in my clinic. You don't understand how things work here, Jenkins began, but Rebecca cut him off with a raised hand. I understand exactly how things work in medicine, Mr. Jenkins. This is my clinic. Now, and in this building, medical ethics supersede local grudges. She turned to Nurse Patton. I'm simply refusing to participate in a community's decision to isolate a family that's already suffered significant loss. She glanced at the children, making sure they were still engaged in their own conversation before continuing. The medical term is secondary trauma, when the aftermath of a traumatic event creates additional harm. What this town has done to your children by shunning them is textbook secondary trauma. I'm the one they blame, Michael said. My kids just got caught in the crossfire. And you've internalized that blame so completely that you've withdrawn from everything, including, to some degree, your children. Her voice remained gentle despite the direct assessment. Grief for your wife, I understand. But this guilt has become destructive, Michael. You're teaching your children that one mistake, one misjudgment, can render a person unworthy of community. Before Michael could formulate a response, their food arrived, delivered by a teenage server rather than Marlene herself. The conversation necessarily shifted to lighter topics as they ate, though Rebecca's words echoed in Michael's mind throughout the meal. As they finished dessert, Hartley's famous apple cobbler that Rebecca declared worth the trip alone, the bell above them door chimed, announcing new arrivals. Michael glanced up automatically and felt himself tense. Roy Packard had entered with his son Jason, now recovered from his strep throat. The boy spotted Lily immediately and waved. Before the accident, the two had been in the same kindergarten, a class, but social interactions had become casualties of the aftermath. Roy noticed the Bennett family a moment later, his jaw tightening visibly. His gaze moved from Michael to Rebecca, comprehension dawning in his expression as he registered their dinner grouping. For a moment, it seemed he might turn and leave. Instead, after a visible internal struggle, he nodded once in Michael's direction. Not quite a greeting, but an acknowledgement of existence. It was more than he had offered in nearly a year. "Dad, can Jason come sit with us?" Lily asked, unaware of the complex adult dynamics at play. "He's my friend from school." Michael hesitated, looking to Roy for guidance. The minor seemed equally uncertain, caught between ingrained resentment and his son's eager expression. Rebecca broke the stalemate with characteristic directness. "Jason, how are you feeling? That was quite a fever you had." The boy grinned, revealing a missing front tooth. "I'm all better, Dr. Torres. Dad says I can have ice cream because my throat doesn't hurt anymore." "Ice cream is excellent medicine," Rebecca agreed solemnly. "We were just finishing our dessert. Perhaps you and your dad would like to join us." The invitation hung in, the air bold and impossible to ignore. The diner had gone noticeably quieter, nearby patrons watching the interaction with undisguised interest. This was no longer just the new doctor associating with the Bennetts. This was a direct challenge to Pine Ridge's established order. Roy Packard looked from Rebecca to Michael, then to his son's hopeful face. Whatever internal calculation he made must have included the fact that this woman had treated his boy when no one else was available, using Sarah Bennett's remedies alongside modern medicine. "Just for a minute," he said gruffly. "We're taking our ice cream to go." And it was hardly a warm acceptance, but it was enough for Jason, who eagerly slid into the booth beside Lily. The two children immediately launched into a detailed discussion of their classmates, oblivious to the significance of the moment. Roy remained standing, clearly uncomfortable, but unwilling to disappoint his son. "Thank you," he said stiffly to Rebecca, "for coming by the other day. Jason's fever broke right after you left." "Sarah's remedy deserves most of the credit," Rebecca replied, seamlessly including Michael in the conversation. Her knowledge was impressive. Roy's gaze flickered to Michael briefly, something unreadable passing across his face. "She helped Martha through morning sickness with Jason. Had some tea that worked when nothing else did." The reference to Sarah, casual, factual, without the usual somber tones that accompanied mentions of the dead, caught Michael off guard. For a moment, it felt like a glimpse of the time before, when their families had existed in the ordinary community of small-town life. "She was good at that," Michael said, the words emerging before he could consider them. "Finding solutions." An awkward silence followed, neither man quite prepared for the sudden normality of the exchange. Roy broke it first, checking his watch with exaggerated interest. "Come on, Jason. Ice cream to go. School night." The boy reluctantly slid out of the booth, extracting a promise from Lily to save him a seat at lunch the next day. Roy nodded. Once more in Rebecca's direction, his gaze skipping over Michael without quite meeting his eyes, and then they were gone, the bell chiming their exit. The restaurant gradually resumed its normal buzz of conversation, though Michael noticed several people watching them with renewed interest. Something had happened, not reconciliation, not even forgiveness, but a fracture in the solid wall of isolation that had surrounded the Bennett family. Rebecca had created a hairline crack through which normal interaction could potentially begin to flow again. "That was Jason from my class," Lily explained unnecessarily, her face bright with excitement. "His dad never lets him talk to me at school." "Things change, Lil," Emma said, with the cautious hope of a child who has learned not to expect too much. "Maybe now he will." They drove back to Rebecca's new house in thoughtful silence. Michael helped carry in a few last items from his truck, while the children continued their plans for decorating, their voices echoing in the mostly empty rooms. As they prepared to leave, Rebecca walked them to the door. "Thank you for your help. Today," she said, "and for dinner." "We should be thanking you," Michael replied, still processing the interaction with Roy Packard, "for everything you've done since you arrived." Rebecca smiled, fatigue evident beneath her usual composure. "I'm just doing my job." "We both know that's not true." He glanced back to where the children were gathering their jackets. "What you said at the restaurant about secondary trauma. You were right. I've been so focused on what I lost, what I did wrong, that I haven't seen what it's doing to them." "Recognition is the first step," Rebecca said softly. "Grieving, I mean. Mum wouldn't have wanted us to stop living." Emma leaned against him, a gesture of physical comfort she had largely abandoned as she took on more adult responsibilities. "Is that why you're different since Dr. Torres came? You're starting to live again?" The question caught Michael off guard with its perception. Had he changed so noticeably in such a short time? He considered his response carefully, respecting both Sarah's memory and his daughter's insight. "Dr. Torres reminded me that helping others is part of living," he said finally, "and that connections matter even when they're complicated." He paused. "Your mum understood that. I just forgot for a while." Emma nodded against his shoulder. "I like Dr. Torres. She doesn't treat us like we're broken or contagious or something." "No, she doesn't," Michael agreed. "She sees us as we are." They sat together at the kitchen table, the journal open between them, Sarah's handwriting a bridge between what had been lost and what might still be possible. Outside, the first true spring rain began to fall, gentle but persistent, preparing the earth for new growth. The next evening, Michael arrived at Rebecca's house precisely at 6, a toolbox in his truck and Sarah's garden journal in his jacket pocket. Something in him needed to share her words, to have Rebecca understand the shift that had occurred in his thinking. It felt important somehow that she know he was beginning to step out of the narrow confines of guilt and grief, even if the process would be slow and uneven. Rebecca answered the door in jeans and a faded university sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, a marked contrast to her professional appearance at the clinic. The casual attire made her seem more approachable, more human, in a way that eased the slight nervousness Michael had felt on the drive over. "Right on time," she said, stepping back to let him in. "I hope you don't mind, but I've already drafted a floor plan for the examination room." She led him to what had been designated as a home office, where she had cleared the furniture except for a desk pushed against one wall. On it lay a sketch showing precisely where she wanted shelving, cabinets, and medical equipment arranged. "Impressive," Michael said, examining the drawing. "You've thought of everything." "Occupational hazard," Rebecca replied with a smile. "I tend to overplan. Nothing wrong with that." He assessed the room, mentally converting her sketch to the actual space. "This is all doable. The shelving will be straightforward. The sink might be trickier depending on the existing plumbing. They spent the next hour measuring and marking, professional focus gradually giving way to more personal conversation as they worked. Rebecca told him about her training in Chicago, her decision to join the rural medicine program, her hope of establishing a permanent practice somewhere she could make a real difference. Michael found himself sharing stories about his construction. Days before becoming a safety inspector, the satisfaction of building something tangible, the pride he had taken in knowing his work would last. "Why did you switch to safety?" Rebecca asked as she helped hold a measuring tape against the wall. "After Emma was born, I wanted more regular hours, less physical risk," Michael explained. "Safety inspection paid better and meant I was home every night." He marked a spot on the wall with a pencil. Ironic that the safer job ended up causing more damage in the end. Rebecca set down the tape measure. "You know that's not entirely fair, right? The investigation cleared you of negligence. The company falsified documents. I should have caught it." The old guilt resurfaced, familiar and corrosive. "I knew those beams didn't look right. And you reported your concerns, according to the publicly available report." Rebecca's voice held the same calm certainty she used when delivering medical diagnoses. "You were overruled by management. That's not failure, Michael. That's corporate malfeasance." He turned to face her, struck by her precise knowledge of the situation. "You researched the accident." "Of course I did." She met his gaze without apology. "When half the town kept referring to what Bennett did, I wanted facts, not gossip." "And you found?" "A man who raised legitimate safety concerns, documented them according to protocol, was pressured to sign off anyway, and then became the town's scapegoat when the very issues he identified caused injuries." She crossed her arms. "Also, a mining company that settled privately with the injured workers on condition they not pursue further legal action, effectively buying their silence while allowing local anger to focus on you rather than corporate headquarters." The assessment was so succinct, so stripped of emotion, yet completely accurate, that Michael found himself momentarily speechless. He had lived within the narrative of his own guilt for so long that having it clinically dissected by an outside observer was disorienting. "That doesn't change what happened to those men," he said finally. "Packard lost his hand. Jenkins can't. Breathe right." "No, it doesn't," Rebecca agreed. "Their injuries are real and permanent, but the responsibility is distributed differently than Pine Ridge has chosen to acknowledge." She stepped closer, her expression softening. "I understand why you accepted the blame, Michael. After losing Sarah, perhaps it even felt right to be punished. But your children have been punished too, and they bear no responsibility at all." Michael closed his eyes briefly, Sarah's words from the journal echoing in his mind. "We do our best with the information we have, and sometimes things still go wrong. That's life, not failure. I found something yesterday," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket for the journal. "Something Sarah wrote before she died." He held it out to Rebecca. "I think you should read it." Rebecca accepted the journal with careful hands, recognizing the significance of what was being shared. "Are you sure?"